Hi, welcome to this Thursday seminar. My name's Jet Jaguar. We're coming to you live from the Recording Conservatory of Austin. Getting a late start today due to some technical difficulties, but we're ready to roll now. Usually these will start promptly at 8:30 p.m. So tonight's topic is drum tracking. And we have a bunch of mics set up on a drum kit. The drum kit itself is what you might consider a low quality starter kit. The idea of tonight's seminar is way more about the theory of setting up drum mics, mic positioning, and then preamp use plus phase check. So we're going to focus on those three things: mic placement, preamp use, the use of a preamp to dial in the sound, and then phase check in the box. Hopefully this should be a good reference for anybody who's getting ready to go into a drum tracking session, especially for your first time, just in terms of how to get set up and how to do a sound check once you have signal. So looking here in the box, we have our session set up. We've got each of our microphones placed and labeled here in the session, from kick in to overhead right. We've got some headphone sends set up so that our drummer can hear the drum signal as it goes through. And we've got Johnny in the booth on our drum kit, ready to play some drums for us as we go through and do our sound check. So the first drum that we're going to set up is the inside kick mic. All right, so the first microphone. So this microphone is a Beta 52, and it is placed on the outside of the kick drum head. Now this kick drum doesn't have a sound hole, which puts us in the position of needing to place that microphone next to the drum skin. And we're going to hear Johnny play that drum a little bit. So let's go ahead and play that. Thank you. That drum is going through, or that microphone, I'm sorry, the Beta 52 is going through the Wonder preamp. I'm going to give that a little bit more input juice. We're using an EQ. So without the EQ, this is what it sounds like. Lovely, right? So this is a low quality drum, but with little EQ, we can actually wake it up a little bit. What I'm doing is taking out some 300, so I might actually adjust that thought process. Yeah, I'm gonna give it a little 3K. Ooh, actually I like that 5 to 8. Okay, so I'm gonna add a little bit of that. I'm adding some 100, so this is without the EQ. And then this is with the EQ. Obviously we're getting a little bit of a level boost, but we'll compensate for that. We want to be recording our input signals at negative 15 dBFS. So I'm using my input gain to give me the drive that I want on this particular drum, which in this case is low. I'm using a high output gain in order to keep the input drive nice and low. I am using a little bit of input drive because I felt like it made this particular drum sound good. Okay, so that's our Beta 52. Again, this is without EQ, and then with EQ, waking that drum up quite a lot. The next microphone we're going to look at is the Yamaha Subkick. So the Yamaha Subkick, which you can hear right now, is set up over here on our Neve preamp. That's placed right near the head of the drum as well. It's placed hopefully in a nice phase coherent position relative to the capsule of the Beta 52. So I'm trying to get the capsule of the Subkick and the capsule of the 52 nice and aligned, and hopefully those will be in good phase when we check phase. So dialing in on my Neve, not a lot of controls here, not a lot needed for this drum. That sounds pretty good. So I'm going to add that back over into my inside kick drum. And now I'm going to experiment with a phase flip. I'm going to come over here to my, what I'm calling the inside, the Beta 52 microphone, and flip phase. And what we can hear is the low end goes away. So that loss of low end is due to the destructive interference. the sound of the outside kick mic, the Yamaha sub kick, is actually being subtracted because it's inversely related polarity. That sound is being subtracted when we reverse the polarity of the kick. So the opposite of bad phase is good phase. We know because we've got bad phase here that we've got good phase here. Cool. Lovely kick drum sound. We're going to go with that. Johnny, if you would play the snare drum, please. Woo! Okay, so the snare top microphone is an SM7B. That is a really low output cardioid dynamic microphone. I love it for snares because it gives a really fat tone. And, ooh, yeah, vintage gear. Really fat tone that we'll hear if we crank this up. Give it a little more input. Cool. So we're really getting that big, warm, round sound out of this drum. All that bottom, turn my EQ off. So you can see my EQ is really helping out a lot here. We're doing a boost at 200. We're doing a cut at 700. The cut is about 5 dB. The boost is about 3 dB. And we're doing a boost at 10K. That's with the EQ. That's without. Obviously, the EQ is making a pretty big difference here. The other mic on our snare drum is the bottom snare mic. That is an SM57. Up here, and that's placed under the snare drum, basically in the mirror image position to the top mic. Now we don't necessarily need the bottom snare mic if we like the sound of the top snare mic. In this case, I really do like the sound of the top snare, and so what we're going to do is first check that they're phase coherent. So we're going to do that by bringing both these mics in together, evening out the levels. And then we're going to flip phase. So this is out of phase. This is in. We can hear that when these drums are out of phase, they get really thin. When they're in, we get that nice thick sound. And let's pause for just a sec, Johnny. I want to point out that unlike the kick drums, which were in tight phase by default because we aligned the capsules to be lined up left to right next to the drum. In the case of the snare drum, we have the two mics pointed at each other, one on the top and one on the bottom of the snare drum. And that creates a situation where the sound is inversely related. So what we have is a positive sound wave on the bottom side and a negative sound wave on the top. The sound is moving away from the top mic and towards the bottom mic. Now both mics are recording the same sound, right? They're both recording that snare drum, but from two different directions. And so this is how phase and polarity relate to each other. Polarity from a sound perspective really just represents direction. So if a sound wave starts moving towards you, that's a positive and then negative sound pulse. If it starts moving away from you, that's that's a negative and positive pulse. Both of those are going to sound the same to the listener, but when they're added together, because of that inverse relationship, they're going to cancel out. So that's what we're dealing with here on the snare drum. So whereas with the kick, both mics were in regular phase, meaning neither one was flipped in order to get the good relationship. With the snare drum, we actually have to flip the phase on one of the snare drum mics. In this case, we're flipping phase on the top snare drum mic. Now we need to remember that we did that because the next thing we're going to do is get our overheads in the picture. So we've got our kicks and our snare mics in. Next thing I'm going to do is bring my overheads in, making sure they're pan centered. Start with the left overhead. Johnny, if you would play the snare drum, please. Okay, so I have my left overhead. Again, I'm using my preamp to dial in a level of -15 dBFS here in the box. Setting that with my output setting on my preamp. Using the input setting to get a nice nominal level here. Hitting around about 0 on the VU meter. With these transients, you can be a little below 0 and still have a nice fat sound. I'm gonna do the same thing now on my right overhead. Woo! Clear my clips. A bunch of low end in this guy, that's nice. Bring those in together. Now I want to check my phase on both of these. So we can hear when I flip phase on one of them, I get a nice, or I get a thin scooped out sound. That hollowed out sound is actually what I want to hear, because I know that when I flip my phase back, that they're in phase and they're going to be nice and tight together. So now I'm going to match the level on the left and the right overhead of the snare drum. So I'm matching the snare drum level left and right. That way when I pan it out, I'm going to hear my snare drum in the middle. Cool. It does sound kind of wide. That's nice to have on a kit like this, nice wide snare drum sound. We can tighten that up later in the mix if we want to pan these overheads in, but for now this is a good sound. Next thing I'm going to do is check the phase of my snare drum to my overheads. So I've got my overheads in phase. I'm going to pan these back to center. Now I'm going to bring my snare drum in. And what I need to do now is check the phase relationship between the snare drum mics and the overhead mics. So I've confirmed that both snare drum mics are in phase with each other, and that both overhead mics are in phase with each other. So now what I want to do is flip either one group or the other. So I'm going to flip both overhead mics in order to confirm that I have the best phase relationship between both overheads and the two snare drum mics. So it's actually better when I flip the two overheads. So I'm going to leave my two overheads flipped. Now, keeping in mind that this means my top snare is flipped, my overheads are flipped, and that gives me the best relationship I can get. Now, I could try unflipping those and inverting the phase relationship of my snare mics. Now flipping phase. And I actually think that's the best relationship I can get. So now I have my top snare not flipped, my bottom snare flipped, and my two overheads not flipped. So before, what we had was the inverse relationship of the snare mics. So we had flipped snare top, not flipped snare bottom. And then we had to flip our overheads in order to get the better relationship to the overheads. I actually like this better than either of those other configurations. So we have the top snare not flipped, bottom snare is flipped, and the overheads are phase neutral. Okay, so I'm going to bring my kick mics in now, and we're going to go kick snare, Johnny, kick snare. Kind of like keeping everything pan center for now. Ooh, yeah, sorry. Let's not deal with the click for now. Cool. All right, so again, main scope of today's seminar is basic sound check using the preamps and phase check. So we're gonna be really careful or conscious and detailed about the phase checking that we do. So we wanna make sure that our kicks and our snares have good phase relationship to our overheads. Now I'm going to try kicks, hit some kicks, and I'm going to try flipping the phase of my overheads. I actually think the kick is better with the phase flipped overheads. So now I'm going to flip my snares back to the way they were. Make sure my kick doesn't get worse. It didn't. Hit the snare. Stick on just the snare for a sec. Keep going on the snare. Cool. Kick. Okay. So I'm actually going to end up back in the second position I had for my snare because I think that does better for the kick. So this is where phase checking gets a little bit complicated, where we have 6 microphones, all in charge of recording the same 2 inputs. We have the kick drum and we have the snare drum. And the phase relationship of all 6 of these mics is going to be different for each of those drums, I should say. So it may be that we might need to move some mics around, and sometimes that's the case. You will have to move some mics to get the best relationship of kick and snare in all of those 6 mics. Now the rest of the mics we're going to add to this add to the party, being the 2 tom mics and the hi-hat and the ride mic. Those should have less of an impact, being that they are not as their points of focus are not pointed at the kicks and snares in the way the overheads and the kick and snare mics are. So the overheads, I should talk about their placement a little bit. I think I skipped over that. The placement of the overheads is above the kit, to the left and the right. These are pretty low overheads and they're pretty tight. I'm hoping that they will be reinforcement for the entire kit and that we can get a lot of our sound from the overheads and that they'll blend nicely with the kick and snare, especially in a tighter stereo image. With a bigger drum kit and a bigger sort of mission statement, we might decide that we wanted more stereo image out of the kit, and so we would put the overheads higher and maybe wider. Depending on how the kit was configured, we can get a lot of different sounds. So in this case, we've got this nice tight configuration. I feel like these 6 microphones are dialed in a pretty cohesive way. I like the phase that we've got going here. And it's really, really worth, with any drum recording that you're doing, to take the time to get this phase dialed in. We will review this phase check procedure again coming through at the end. For now, I just want to dial in these tom mics a little bit so we can do the preamps. Tom 1, this microphone is an ATM 250. That's a hypercardioid dynamic microphone placed right on top of the drum shell. It's on the batter head and it's right up against the rim. What we want is a big, loud, long boing out of this drum. So we focused on the rim as opposed to the attack point, which would be the place where the stick hits the drum in the middle of the head. So we're out near the rim. We got a nice boing going on. Let's hear that tom. Cool. Don't hate that. Now let's hear tom 2. Great, thanks. So tom 2 is the same kind of deal. It's an ATM 250 hypercardioid dynamic microphone placed near the outside of the rim, out near the hoop of that floor tom. Again, trying to get a lot of that big sort of resonant tone out of the drum. If we wanted a tighter, more attacky, less lengthy out of the drum head, out of the drum sound, what we would do is we'd point the mic in more towards the center of the drum. So last 2 mics, we've got a hi-hat mic. This is a C480B. That's an AKG microphone, and we are using the hypercardioid microphone capsule. It's going to give it a tighter sound and to give it more focus, give it a tighter emphasis on the specific little place on the hi-hat that we've pointed this. So we go ahead and hit your hi-hat. So good, right? So I actually do kind of like that hi-hat sound quite a bit. It's got that nice sort of like low, mid, throaty thing going on. When hi-hats get too bright and pingy for me, I tend not to love them because they don't combine with the overheads in a way that's super helpful. So I tend to like a darker hi-hat sound. I love that. Thanks, Johnny. And now we're going to go to the ride cymbal, which is also the crash cymbal. Woo! In this case, we're miking it from underneath, which is kind of cool for this kind of a kit. Let's hear just that microphone. Not that one, this one. Go ahead. Cool. So we're hearing the underside of the cymbal. This is the darker side of that cymbal. It's the more sort of gongy, resonant side of the cymbal. Not always a nice part of a cymbal to mic, I should point out. It's a nice thing to try when a cymbal is small, when a cymbal is tight on a cymbal stand, and when you, generally speaking, want a fairly like drum machine-y sound out of your cymbal. So this guy, I'm not expecting to sound particularly dynamic. I'm not expecting to do a lot of ping, 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 and psh, psh, psh out of this particular ride cymbal. I'm expecting just kind of womp, womp, womp kind of thing out of this guy anyway. So we pointed the KM84 at the bottom of the cymbal in order to get more of that sort of gongy sound. One more time. One. Yeah. Love it. Good. So now let's bring all these mics together. Oh no. Now we're going to ask Johnny to play the drums. And we're just going to dial in a little rough mix here and then look at our phase once again, just to make sure that we're hitting that point real hard. So go ahead and play a little beat, Johnny. All right, great. So pause for a sec there, Johnny. Thank you very much for being our drummer tonight. I appreciate it, Johnny. Johnny's one of the best drummers around. Go check out Janaskus on SoundCloud. For real though, my man Johnny under Janaskus on SoundCloud is one of the better hip hop producers I have run into lately, and frankly, to call him a hip hop producer is massively reductive. My man makes some of the most innovative tracks I've heard in a long time. So go check out Janaskus on SoundCloud. What?
I make black metal.
He makes black metal. He makes black metal look like Norwegian black metal from like the 80s. You wouldn't even believe it. It's like Def Leppard in here. Janaskus. What's up with your name, Johnny? That's hilarious. That's a really great, funny story. Thank you. So for real, check him out though. He's great. And what I want to do as the very last thing here is to point out that your phase relationship between these drums is going to be the best way you have of making them sound full and whole. This kit, admittedly, is not the best drum kit in the world, but could sound like absolute garbage if we weren't taking time with things like good outboard EQ, good preamp selection, and good phase coherent drum setup. So we want to take just a brief moment here at the very last of the seminar to point out that once you have your drum rough mix dialed in, it's important to check your phase through again, being that you have changed your panning, which will change your phase relationships just a little bit, especially your stereo phase relationships. Now, these are ones that we checked in mono because your mono phase relationship is your most fundamental relationship. And if that's good, it should mean that your stereo phase relationships will be at least have a good starting point. But if you have a rough mix that more accurately reflects what you're gonna want out of your recorded drum sounds in your mix, then you wanna go ahead and check your phase relationships again against that. So I'm gonna go back to kick, snare, overheads. I'm gonna bring my tom mics and my hi-hats in, and I'm just gonna have Johnny play the kick. And I'm gonna flip phase on the 2 kick mics. Cool, so still much better phase natural with those, that's great. Go ahead and keep playing the kick. I'm gonna flip the snare mics. Good. Kick is still better with the phase flipped snares the way we liked them. Oh, we wanted this guy. Yep. Good. Now I'm going to try flipping my overheads against the kick. Good. We still have the best overhead phase relationship. I'm now going to try flipping. Go ahead and play the snare. I'm going to try flipping my snare back. Good, we definitely have the better phase relationship on the snare, and I'm gonna try flipping the overheads. Good. So what I'm confirming here is that all of my primary phase relationships are still solid, and that this drum kit is good to go for recording. So thank you for tuning in to today's seminar. Please review this seminar for mic placement on drums, basic mic placement on drums, for basic preamp use, for dialing in a nice input versus output gain sound, and then phase check across the drum set. My name is Jet Jaguar. We've been coming to you live from the Recording Conservatory of Austin. We'll be back with you next Thursday for another live stream seminar. Thank you and good night.